Michael Jackson was not a superstar. He was a victim beyond the mansion's international fame, the millions of dollars and the tours. There was a broken man whose life was marked by emotional problems, cruelty, and above all, a lot of loneliness. You thought Jackson had been someone with an enviable life and just a few problems? You are wrong. After listening to his story in depth, what you think of him may completely change, since I will not talk so much about albums and tours, but about his personal life and his dark thoughts from his abusive father and the issue with children. Until the day he left this world. It is August of 1958 in a small industrial city called Gary in Indiana. A child is born who will change the world of entertainment forever. His parents are lower class. Joseph Jackson, along with his wife Catherine, have 3 daughters and 5 sons. His mother is loving, but his father is a very disciplined and strict man, very strict, and always seeks to improve the quality of life of the family. However, the things his father is about to do to improve the family economy will bring serious consequences to little Michael's mental health. Joseph notices that his children from a young age have skills to dance and sing, so he decides to create a family group which Michael Jackson joins. When he is only 6 years old, his father quickly adopts the role of manager and puts his children to work hard because he knows that the boys have potential to stand out in the artistic world. A few years later, the Jackson 5 win a talent contest. After this, they begin to do small tours in bars, local auditoriums, school dances, and nightclubs. In 1967, Joe professionalizes the band, signing their first contract with a record label. The success of the whole group keeps increasing, and they begin to have more and more recognition. However, behind all this recognition, there is a sad hidden side. Remember I told you, Joe was a strict father? Well, he was not only strict, he was also violent. He would yell at them and hit them during rehearsal so that things would come out perfectly. He would sit on a chair in front of them with a belt in his hand. Years later, in an interview with Oprah, Michael stated, "He was very strict and very severe. Just with his gaze, he could frighten you. There were times when he came to see me and I was so scared I felt like throwing up." Things kept getting better for the Jackson 5. However, the one who stands out the most for his dancing talent, but above all for his incredible voice, is Michael, who for his young age was already considered a promise in the world of music. The Jackson 5 appear for the first time on television in 1969 in a contest called Miss Black America. That program is watched by hundreds of thousands of people, which gives them even more exposure and recognition. Many of the interviews focus almost exclusively on little Michael, and major magazines like Rolling Stone declare him a prodigy. But that same year, when Michael is only 11 years old, the group releases the song I Want You Back, and it becomes a huge success, so much so that it quickly becomes the most popular song in all of the United States. In this song, Michael is the lead voice, so most of the attention focuses on him. This fact is extremely important because little by little, he is moving toward his solo career. And that is exactly how it was. At the same time that he works with his brothers, Michael begins his career as a solo artist, and with each album he releases, he keeps improving a little more, little by little. He is preparing to create the album that will mark a before and after in his career as a solo artist. The famous album Off the Wall. Until now, everyone sees the group and Michael as superstars, but behind the spectacle, there is a boy who lost something very important. Until now, all the professional success has been at the cost of a lot of work, but above all at the cost of his childhood. So that you understand the amount of work he had up to that moment, when Michael Jackson was 20 years old, he had released 14 albums in a group with his brothers. That is with the Jackson 5. And as a solo artist, Michael had released 4 if we add everything. It gives us a total of 18 albums, but we must take into account that he started at 6 years old, which means that Michael had by that time released more than 1 album per year. And all of this while doing live shows, tours, concerts, television appearances, rehearsals, recordings in the studio, and interviews. And all this load of stress and work was about to bring very, very strong psychological consequences. In fact, Michael himself many years later declared in a speech the following: "My childhood was completely taken away. There were no birthdays or Christmas. There were never the pleasures of a normal childhood. These were replaced by hard work, struggle, and pain, in exchange for material things and professional success." The success for the Jackson 5 was so big that they moved to a house much bigger in Encino, California. They went from living 11 people in a house with 2 rooms to living in practically a mansion. Little Michael kept growing both physically and professionally. He was no longer a child, making children music. Now he was a teenage idol. He releases his 3 albums as a solo artist until finally in 1973, February, he releases the album that would mark the before and after in his career, the album Off the Wall. This quickly becomes a huge commercial success with hits like Rock With You and Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, which made Michael win his first Grammy. This album becomes the first in history to generate 4 singles that reached #1 of the most listened songs. Things were going well, but they were about to get even better. However, here a new problem appears in the boy's life: plastic surgeries. In 1979, while he was in a dance rehearsal, Michael falls and breaks his nose, so he needs a surgical intervention. The first surgery was initially presented as a medical necessity to help correct a breathing problem that had worsened due to the fracture. But there was also a change in its appearance. It was a process called alarplasty, which, as we can see, makes narrower the base of the nose. Michael may have done this for several reasons, but here is a quite sad possibility. In an interview with Oprah, Michael stated, "My father used to bother me saying that I had a big nose and that I was an ugly boy." This is crucial to understand this part of his life, since it is possible that Michael suffered from body dysmorphia. This is not completely proven, but there are several factors that can help us deduce it. This disorder is a mental health problem in which a person is concerned in an obsessive way about what they perceive as defects in their appearance, even though these sometimes do not even exist. And as we saw, Michael grew up in a home where his father mistreated him both physically and verbally. The abuse and constant criticism toward physical aspects like the nose or the boy's appearance can plant the seeds of a negative body image, especially coming from parental figures, which are fundamental for the development of self-esteem and self-perception. Body dysmorphia does not only affect self-perception, but it can lead to harmful behaviors like multiple risky plastic surgeries, and it can also lead to anxiety, depression, and in extreme cases to self-destruction. His life and his multiple plastic surgeries suggest a struggle with self-image. The case of Michael Jackson shows us how childhood wounds can manifest in deeply disturbing ways in adulthood. In the interview mentioned earlier, he also stated the following: "I could not look at myself in the mirror and I would see my face in the darkness. I would just look at myself and cry." In 1982, Jackson releases the album that changed everything, an album called Thriller, which shook the world. It quickly became the best-selling album in history, and in February of 1984, he wins 8 Grammy Awards, setting a record. The songs Beat It and Billie Jean and Thriller are immensely popular, with more than 66 million copies sold around the world, and some estimates suggest that the number is much higher. Thriller is the best-selling album of all time, so much so that it manages to position itself on the Billboard 200 list for several years and spent a record of 37 weeks in the #1 spot. Also, the memorable Thriller video revolutionized the way music videos are made and perceived, earning the first MTV Video Vanguard Award in 1984, later renamed the Michael Jackson Video Award. But Michael did not keep everything for himself. He also began to support many charitable causes in 1985. He participates in We Are the World, which raises more than $60 million for humanitarian aid. This is a charity song recorded to raise funds for the humanitarian crisis in Africa. The song was written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie, produced by Quincy Jones. It brought together a variety of famous artists of the time in an unprecedented collaboration event. And also in this decade, the boy performed for the first time the already known dance move moonwalk during a television program, giving the illusion that Jackson could walk backwards without effort. This move had already been performed by other artists. However, it was Michael who popularized it and incorporated it as his signature dance move. Michael Jackson was at the top of the world. However, during the peak of Thriller, a tragic event also happens, which will significantly impact and negatively Michael's life. It is January 27th of 1984. Michael Jackson is filming a commercial for Pepsi in an auditorium in Los Angeles. But while the commercial is being filmed, something goes terribly wrong with the pyrotechnic effects and a fire ignites on Jackson's head. Everyone runs to help him, but the damage is already done. The fire causes second-degree and third-degree burns on the upper part of his scalp. He is immediately taken to the hospital, where he is quickly treated for his injuries. The burns are severe and require immediate treatment, which later turn into a surgery to implant skin grafts on the scalp. Obviously, Michael sued Pepsi and won the lawsuit, obtaining compensation of $1.5 million, which he donated to the burn center called Broadman Medical Center. However, beyond the physical damage, the incident also had a significant emotional and psychological impact. Michael Jackson, if he was already extremely aware of his appearance due to years of public scrutiny, criticism for his noticeable physical changes, and the trauma left by the psychological abuse from his father in his childhood, the accident only intensified all those feelings. But that is not the worst part. The chronic pain derived from the accident and the subsequent surgeries made Michael start taking painkillers, many painkillers which he would become dependent on, and would be the cause of a very serious, tragic, and sad outcome. In 1987, Michael releases the album Bad, and with it, he reaches the highest point of his career, but it also marks the beginning of his decline as a person. This album manages to sell around 35 million copies worldwide and is certified with multiple platinum records in several countries. Bad produced a series of hits that reached the top 10 of the Billboard charts, including Bad the Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, Another Part of Me, Smooth Criminal, among others. The profits from the song Man in the Mirror are donated to a charity organization that helped children who suffered from cancer. With the release of the album also came the Bad World Tour. The tour began on September 12, 1987 in Tokyo and ended on January 27, 1989 in Los Angeles, United States. That means it lasted 2 years and 4 months. It attracted more than 4.4 million fans in approximately 123 concerts, and it is estimated that the Bad World Tour grossed more than $160 million in today's money, which makes it one of the highest grossing tours of all time. Up to that moment, he also buys his mansion for $18 million located in California with an area of 1,100 hectares, which he names Neverland, which he inaugurates in 1980. Inside Neverland, among other things, you could find a movie theater, a zoo and a theme park, a carousel, a long railway, and a roller coaster. All these facilities were acquired by Jackson to entertain the numerous children with terminal illnesses who were received at the mansion, for whom he had always provided altruistic help and in his desire to stay close to his childhood. To this place, Michael even invited figures like Michael Jackson and Corey Feldman. The name of this place refers to Neverland from Peter Pan, where children only have fun and never become adults. Both the album and the tour that I mentioned a moment ago are not only monumental in terms of commercial and critical success, but they also mark a change in the way the world sees Michael Jackson. He became a global icon during that period, gaining an unprecedented amount of fame and recognition. At that time, he also publishes his autobiography called Moonwalk, in which he offered the world a detailed vision of his life and his career, becoming a bestseller, and in which Jackson writes, "I am one of the loneliest people in the world." In the book, Michael Jackson describes loneliness as one of the most difficult facets of his life and fame, an isolation that he felt despite, or perhaps because of his worldwide fame, he had reached such a level of success that his identity as an individual had faded into the shadow of his own being. The King of Pop was a title that gave him massive admiration, but at the same time created an almost insurmountable barrier between him and the rest of humanity. But even worse, because of the massive amount of success, people no longer saw Jackson as a human being, but as an opportunity, an exclusive story for a journalist, a $1 million contract for a producer, a stepping stone toward fame for an emerging musician. Perhaps Jackson might have felt that his humanity had become a form of currency, leaving aside his feelings, desires, and emotions, transforming him into an object. Paradoxically, he is surrounded by millions of fans and an environment that constantly wanted something from him. This could have led him to extreme loneliness. In 1991, he releases the album Dangerous, and like almost everything Jackson touches, it quickly becomes a commercial and critical success. Singles like Black or White and Remember the Time top the charts. 1 year later, he does a world tour called Dangerous World Tour, which is a great success and further solidifies Jackson's status as a global superstar. Later, he achieves another milestone in his career as an artist. In 1993, he participates in the Super Bowl halftime show, completely revolutionizing these performances. However, in August of 1993, hell breaks loose. The Los Angeles police begin an investigation after Jordan Chandler, a 13-year-old boy, and his father Evan Chandler accuse Jackson of misconduct, which creates a media hell for the artist. Later, Jackson's house in the Neverland mansion is searched by the police, but the authorities do not find conclusive evidence. Michael Jackson is on an international tour at that moment, and the news of the search sends shockwaves through the entertainment world.
I'm here to announce, as you probably all know by now, that we've filed formal charges, a felony criminal complaint against Mr. Jackson.
Please keep an open mind and let me have my day in court. I deserve a fair trial like every other American citizen. I will be acquitted and vindicated when the truth is told.
However, 4 months later, Michael Jackson is subjected to a body search, and the authorities take photos of his private parts. The photographs taken are used to compare them with the descriptions given by Jordan Chandler. This event becomes a significant source of humiliation and stress for Jackson and receives wide media coverage. This event in his life added to the criticism and comments from literally the entire world translates into strong periods of stress for Michael, which little by little begins to turn into mental health problems like depression or insomnia. Very possibly, this type of situation made Michael take refuge in the consumption of medications. And in order to fight his insomnia, he began to use medications like Valium to be able to continue with his life. In January of 1994, Michael Jackson, together with his lawyers, reach a civil agreement. Although the criminal investigation continues, Jackson and the Chandlers reach an agreement outside of court. It is reported that the amount was between $15 and $25 million. It is important to mention that Michael Jackson always proclaimed his innocence. His legal team argues that the agreement is not an admission of guilt and that it was made to allow Jackson to move forward with his life. Also around that time, Jackson enters his first marriage with the daughter of Elvis Presley. That is Lisa Marie Presley. Lisa Marie has mentioned in interviews that Jackson approached her at a time when both were going through difficult moments. She was in the middle of a divorce, and he was facing accusations of sexual abuse. Many in the media and the general public speculated that the marriage was a public relations move, especially given the accusations involving minors that Jackson was facing at that time. This marriage lasted less than 2 years as they ended up divorcing. Presley has mentioned in interviews that one of the reasons for their divorce was Jackson's struggle with dependence on prescription medications.
In the marriage, when he had to make a decision, was it the drugs and the sort of vampires, or me?
Something that she tried unsuccessfully to help him overcome. In November of 1996, Jackson marries again. But this time with Debbie Rowe. They met while she worked as a nursing assistant at the clinic of the dermatologist, Dr. Arnold Klein. She gave birth to his first son, Michael Joseph Jackson Jr., also known as Prince, and also to his second child, Paris Michael Catherine Jackson. Although Rowe has stated that she loved Jackson, their marriage has been described by many as more transactional than romantic. Rowe and Jackson did not live together in a conventional way, and she has pointed out in interviews that her main role was to provide him with children. Michael was such a massively media figure that he could not have any formal relationship without the media and people getting involved to judge his actions. This marriage also did not last long. They divorced just 3 years later, and Rowe gave full custody of the children to Jackson. The paternity of Jackson's children has been the subject of much criticism and controversy. Some people even questioned whether Jackson was the biological father of his children. During these years, Michael's dependence on medication was increasing, but a terrible event made it even worse. In 1999, while performing a series of concerts, the platform that was holding him failed, and instead of making a smooth descent, it dropped very quickly, injuring the artist's spine. At that moment, he gave his maximum effort to continue singing, but backstage he collapsed. This fall left Jackson permanently injured, but above all with a lot of back pain. Obviously, this pain was treated with more painkillers. Michael Jackson was already dependent on these substances before. However, this accident made the situation even worse. By the early 2000s, Jackson's popularity was still massive, but a decline could already be seen by 2003. A documentary is released that puts Jackson back in the eye of the storm. However, this time much worse. This documentary is called Living with Michael Jackson. In this report, the British journalist Martin Bashir interviews and lives with the singer for 8 months. This piece of content was extremely controversial, since Michael openly stated spending nights with young people. Bashir repeatedly asks Jackson why he invites young people to his room, and Jackson defends himself, stating that such activity is natural when they are children of friends or close family members, and that many young people, including members of the Culkin family, have stayed in the same room with him. However, Jackson firmly denies any inappropriate intention in this. Nevertheless, the media tears Jackson apart because of these statements, and public opinion makes Michael fall dramatically. Michael Jackson felt betrayed by Martin Bashir and complained that the film gave a distorted image of his behavior and conduct. He said that in the final version of his interview, Bashir only used the material that supported the negative view that Bashir had toward Jackson. Even Madonna commented on it. "I have not seen this documentary, but it sounds disgusting, as if Bashir exploited a friendship to publicly humiliate someone for your own benefit. It will only come back to you." But why did Jackson like being surrounded by young people? Well, Michael did not only like being around them, he also liked to be like them in many videos. We can notice that he had childlike behaviors, typical of much younger people. Did he do it just to be close to minors? Or is there something deeper behind it? When an adult shows this type of behavior, it could be considered a form of regression. In psychological terms, it is a defense mechanism initially identified by Sigmund Freud that leads a person to return to a previous stage of development to avoid facing stress or current emotional trauma. In fact, Jackson is not the only recorded case. There are other examples in the world of art who faced fame success or simply extreme life circumstances in their youth and who seem to have dealt with emotional or behavioral problems in adulthood. For example, Britney Spears or Judy Garland regression can manifest in different ways, but in Michael's case, it appeared through behaviors, attitudes, and activities associated with childhood. By returning to a previous stage of development, a person may feel a sense of safety or comfort, taking everything into account. It may be that Jackson liked being surrounded by them because it helped him return to the childhood he never had, but also because young people did not want anything from him. They are not interested in record deals, media exclusives, or commercial partnerships. They simply exist in the moment. This could have offered one of the few authentic interactions in Michael's life, I repeat. This is only my interpretation, and it is important to clarify that I am not approving nor defending these behaviors. In January of 2004, just after the release of the documentary, Jackson is formally charged with multiple counts related to inappropriate conduct and also charges for providing alcohol to a minor 1 year later. That is, in 2005, the trial begins in the Superior Court of Santa Barbara County, California. The case becomes highly public and receives global media coverage during the trial. The prosecution presents a series of witnesses, including former and current employees of Neverland, as well as other young individuals who had spent time with Jackson. The defense argues that the accusations are an attempt to extort money and presents its own witnesses to refute the charges during the trial. Jackson's physical and mental health is affected during this period. His body and face changed significantly due to his noticeable weight loss. Finally, after 14 weeks of trial, Jackson is declared not guilty of all charges, but although he was acquitted, his public image suffered considerable damage, and he spent the following years away from the public eye, facing financial problems. In March of 2009, Michael Jackson announces in a press conference in London, after that rehearsals begin, although there are rumors that his health is in a concerning state. By this time, the use of medication was part of his daily life, especially one called propofol. This medication is a sedative commonly used in hospital settings to sedate patients during surgeries or other medical procedures. However, Michael used it to be able to sleep. For Michael, its use became so frequent that he referred to it as his milk because of the white color of the substance. Michael had been away from the stage for a long time, so he had lost his physical condition. It had been practically 10 years without making an effort of this magnitude, and suddenly he would have to rehearse for long hours, have meetings and speak with producers from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week, all of this with chronic back pain and insomnia. So in order to complete the tour, Michael requests in his contract a personal doctor to assist him throughout the entire tour. That doctor is Dr. Murray. This doctor already knew Michael and understood perfectly what he needed, so after rehearsals, when Michael could not sleep, Murray administered propofol so that Jackson could fall asleep and perform well in rehearsals the next day. But one bad day, Dr. Murray made a serious mistake on June 25th, 2009. It was a day like any other. Dr. Murray administered his dose of propofol to Michael so he could sleep, but this time Jackson's body reacted differently. It went from moderate sedation to deep sedation, causing his body to stop breathing, and he passed away due to respiratory failure. When paramedics arrived, they tried to revive him without success, and hours later, he was pronounced dead. Many people from his close circle and not so close knew about his dependence on medications and could have helped him by sending him to rehabilitation. However, sending him to rehabilitation meant that he would stop working for the shows.
And therefore, he would stop generating money. So the partners and contractors, instead of intervening when his relationship with medications became dangerous, chose to look the other way and let Michael continue using these substances because it was more profitable than helping him. This is not a happy story. Throughout his life, Michael was treated as a means to an end. Here, we have a man who crossed borders, broke records, and entertained millions, but at the same time lived in an emotional and social prison, from his earliest childhood to his final days. His story began with a childhood that was overshadowed by work, as his father and other adults pushed him into the world of entertainment. He was taught from a very early age that his value was in his ability to perform, to be a profitable product, rather than in his simple existence as a human being, and as he grew older, that scrutiny intensified to unimaginable levels. Depression and anxiety are not surprising when every aspect of your life is examined and judged publicly. The media, far from being neutral observers, often became aggressors, worsening his already fragile emotional state. The most painful part of Michael's story is perhaps the deep loneliness that seemed to follow him in a world that valued him more for what he could offer than for who he was. True human connection became something rare. This constant objectification and exploitation from his childhood contributed to a life of emotional isolation and dependence on substances, perhaps as a way to cope in the absence of healthier and more loving alternatives. When we reflect on Michael's life, we are faced with a difficult lesson about the human cost that is often paid when we forget that behind every product there is a person. His life was a wake-up call about what can happen when we treat people as means to an end instead of human beings deserving of love, respect, and care.